ito ay rated SPG. Striktong patnubay at gabay ng magulang ang kailangan. Maaaring may masiselang tema, lengguwahe, karahasan, sexual, horror o droga na hindi angkop sa mga bata.
Paano nga ba magturo? Ito ba ay simpleng pagbasa lamang ng kaalaman sa mga kabataan? O paghubog sa kanilang kalinangan at karakter? Paghahanda sa kanilang kinabukasan sa pagharap sa pagsubok ng buhay na kanilang tatahakin? Atin pong tunghayan muli ang isang liham mula sa isang guro na naglalahad ng kanyang karanasan sa pagtuturo sa paaralan na kanyang pinaglilingkuran. Dear customer, internet service for your PLDT account may have been restricted due to
Excuse me. Cut! Sorry po, mali po ata yung sulat na naibigay sa inyo. Bill po ata ng PLDT yan, sir.
Ha? Saan yung sulat na babasahin ko? Ano ba naman ito, direct? Pambira po ito, oh.
Sir, pasensya na po. Ito yung liham.
Ayan, pagsabihin.
Gusto nyo naman mga trabaho nyo. Nasayang oras natin dito. Sir, pasensya na, sir. Sige, backup na tayo.
Sige.
Kasi ito na yung natin.
Atin po ngayon tunghayan ang isang liham mula sa isa nating letter sender na isa ring guro ukol sa kanyang karanasan sa pagtuturo sa paaralan na kanyang pinaglilingkuran. Dear Charot, kumusta po? Sana nawa ay nasa mabuti kayong kalagayan. Ako nga po pala si Joanna, isang guro sa mataas na paaralan ng San Jose. Ang aking karanasan ay nagsimula noong...
Good morning, class.
Good morning, ma'am.
Today, we will be studying about biological science. So, biology is a branch of science that deals with the study of living things. So, who can give me an example of living things?
Welcome to the art of questioning. In this session, we will learn about the classification of questions used by teachers to facilitate learning. Questions are classified according to the type of response the questioner needs from her respondents. In this case, the students. The first type of the question teacher asks is classified as soliciting. This type of question is used to acquire information.
Ma'am,
Yes, Mr. B-Boy.
plants, animals, and bacteria.
Very good. So, those are correct. Now, living things like plants, animals, and bacteria are dependent upon each other for survival. So, each species could be source of nutrition for each other. There are certain animals that depend on plants for food, while the certain microorganisms depend on the carcasses of animals also for food, and their excreta, which are deposited into the soil, are converted into nutrients that the plants depend on. So this relationship is called food chain. Now, based on your understanding about the process of food chain, if species depends on each other by consuming each other, how come they do not get totally annihilated? How does a species continue to survive?
Hello again, I'm your friendly neighborhood Consentia. You see, the teacher asked another question here which is not only different in content but also in its classification. This question is classified as directing. This type proposes the course of action to take or guide one into thinking of an alternative.
Ma'am,
Yes, Mr. Berto?
Each species is able to survive because there are more plants living than every animal can consume. There are also animals that consume other animals who consumes plants. Also, animals do not live long. When they die, their dead remains are decomposed as they get consumed by the microorganisms living on the ground and transforms them into nutrients that seeds of plants need to grow and propagate. Also, dead animals are replaced by their offspring through reproduction.
So thank you for that very insightful response that will be recorded as your recitation for today. So the population of plants and animals outnumber their daily need for consumption. Also, each species is able to multiply multiply through the process of reproduction. If we put a fish inside a bowl without water, what will happen to that particular fish and why?
Oh, sorry about that. Here, we now see a new and different question is asked by the teacher. In this question, the teacher first gave a scenario. Ask the students what will happen and why. This one is classified as evaluating. This type calls for weighing evidences or assessing the effect of some factors and conditions.
Ma'am!
Yes, B-boy.
Ma'am, the fish will die of suffocation due to lack of oxygen. This is because the fish, unlike other animals, have a special type of organ used for breathing underwater called gills. These gills help the fish breathe oxygen from water by pumping water over their gills. Without water, the fish will suffocate.
That will be recorded as a recitation for today. Now, before we dismiss the class, I will first give you your activity for today. So please follow instructions carefully. Each one of you will need to bring a live form to school tomorrow, which we will use for our experiment. So you may go to the school pond or anywhere with bodies of water in order to catch your frog. Where will you get the frogs that you will need to bring tomorrow?
Oh, here you are again. I can catch a break, can I? Well, anyway, the last question we witnessed is called responding. This type asks for something to be done. Now go and let me finish my meal. Storbo.
From the school pond or from anywhere near bodies of water.
Okay, so very good. Class is now dismissed. Goodbye, class.
Goodbye, ma'am.
Ganun na nga po ang nangyari, charot. Habang ako po ay nagtuturo, bigla na lang po lumabas ang aking konsensya para ipaliwanag ang klase ng aking pagtatanong. Nagtataka ako, tila hindi po ito napapansin ng aking mga estudyante. Nakakaasiwa man po sa simula, pero katagalan ay nasanay na din po ako hanggang nangyari po ang isang bagay na di ko inaasahan. Minsan habang ako ay kumakain sa kantin, bigla pong tumabi sa akin ang isa sa aking kasamahang guro.
Hi. Hello, Ma'am Jo.
Hi,
Good
sir.
morning.
Good morning.
How are you, ma'am?
I'm okay, sir. How about you?
I'm good, ma'am. I saw you teaching your students yesterday and I was inspired by your strategy in asking questions. I just wondered, why do you often ask questions rather than just give lectures?
Because for me, the best way to teach my students is through facilitation. So I help them learn by encouraging them to participate in the discussion about our lessons. So through the art of asking questions and giving them affirmation whenever they answer in order to encourage them to participate. So even if they are unsure of their answers.
Wow, that is a good strategy. But do you know what questions to ask?
I once attended a seminar on facilitation. There, we were taught that before formulating your questions, one must have a clear purpose or objective in mind. This is so that your questions will help both you and your student learning the process. So during facilitation, one must keep in mind that when you ask a question to your students, your purpose should be assess cognition. You ask question to determine your students' current knowledge and level of understanding. This is to promote higher level of thinking among your students. One may ask divergent questions and open-ended inquiries to them to analyze and evaluate their own answers. So for example, how does an astronaut float in a space shuttle? So another is for verification. So this is when you ask your student to perform an experiment. You ask them questions in order to verify or determine the exactness or accuracy of their activity and performance. So for example, based on your observations, why did the 1 kilogram of nail sink faster than the 1 kilogram of cotton, even though they both have the same weight? Also, asking the right questions encourages them to think creatively by probing into their originality. So for example, how will you present the composition of the solar system? Since we are not only assessing their cognitive domain of learning, but also their affective domain, we must also ask questions that evaluating questions to elicit responses that include judgments, value, and choice. So for example, the Department of Science and Technology helps you to improve and acquire new knowledge. Asking questions also motivates students to think productively. Asking the right questions motivates students to practice and develop their cognitive reasoning. It challenges them to analyze facts, recognizes patterns, and invokes memory and recall. For example, why are many Filipinos today becoming more interested in home-based container gardening? We also ask questions to motivate students before discussing one's lesson. A number of topics can serve to arouse one student's interest and attention. Asking interesting questions often help put students in the right mood. For example, is there anyone here has an idea how an elephant give birth? Do you want to know how? Most of all, asking questions is a good tool for instruction. Questions properly asked for information directs, guides, and advises students on what and how to do an activity. Example, what are the procedures to keep a paper dry under water?
Wow, you really put a lot of thought into this, haven't you? It really sounds interesting, ma'am. I will also try to include this strategy in my lesson plan. Thank you for sharing, ma'am.
You're welcome, sir. No problem.
Okay, I need to go, ma'am. I still have a class to attend to.
Okay, sir. Bye.
Thank you, bye.
Inday! Sorry po mga ating manonood, pasensya na po dahil nakaka-nosebleed po talaga yung letter ng ating letter center guide. Inday, halika na dito, amin na yung tissue.
Here's your tissue, sir.
Ano, pa-English ka pa. Ano, punta ka na nga doon, tapusin mo na yung ginagawa mo.
Opo, sir. Gagawin ko pa mamaya. Magti-tiktok na ako. Sir.
Ano, TikTok? Tuktukan ka na dyan eh. Punta ka na nga
Sige,
doon.
sir.
Nahalo ka na eksena eh, ha? At ganun na nga po ang nangyari sa Rod. Imbis na makakain, ay parang nag-conduct pa ako ng seminar sa pagturo sa aking mga kapwa-guro. Dahil maraming ibang guro ang nakarinig sa usapan namin ay bigla naglapitan sa akin para makahingi ng payo ukol sa kanilang pagtuturo. Kaya nagtuloy po ang aming talakayan sa faculty office. Kasama din po ang aming janitor na kasalukuyang nag-aaral din ng Unity.
How can we formulate questions that could motivate participation from our students?
You need to first have a basic knowledge of your students' level of cognitive earning. So this can be determined through formative assessment we are required to perform every day with our students. So these facts will help you determine what levels of questions you will ask. There are two levels of questioning, the low level and the high level questioning.
Can you give an example of low level and high level of question?
Low-level questions include memory questions or those that require simple recall. So for example, define energy or state the first law of motion. The second one is the high-level questions. So these are questions that calls for a response, ability to analyze, evaluate, and solve problems. So for example, what is the distance between the distance of a planet and its period of revolution?
How do we determine the extent of inquiry to our students?
We can determine the extent of inquiry towards our student by dividing them into two categories. So the first one is called convergent questions and the other one is called divergent questions. Convergent questions are questions that require a single predictable answer. Examples are called for defining, stating, interpreting, and summarizing. Number two is the divergent questions, are questions that require the respondents to think in different directions, to think of alternative actions, or to arrive at your own decision. So for example, what do you think will happen if you really take time to accomplish your assignments?
I believe that asking questions is a good strategy to facilitate participation with your students. But how specifically can we motivate students to think and respond?
Wow!
Sorry ma'am sir, nag-aaral din po kasi ako ng Unity ngayon sa Fulbright.
It's okay, he asked a really interesting question. There are also ways that we can motivate our students to get interested in participating by helping them think and reflect. There are also types of questions we can use to effectively accomplish this. They are rhetorical, informational, leading, and probing. For rhetorical questions, our questions that are often asked in fast pace and sometimes do not require an answer. The purpose in asking this type of question is to stimulate thinking and reflection among your respondents. For example, would it be a great experience to be able to go anywhere you want to go without worrying about anything? Number 2 is informational questions. These are questions that require one to supply information. For example, what forces keep a satellite in its orbit? And then number 3, we have the leading questions. These are the questions that lead respondents to the right answer. For example, based on the number of legs, which of them is an insect? And then the last one is the probing questions. So these are the questions once asked of students to ask for application of principles learned. For example, why is it classified as a third-class library?
Ay! Nandiyan na pala kayo. Pensa na. Minsan kasi sideline ako bilang janitor. Ganun na nga po ang nangyari sa nalipasan man ako ng gutom, di man ako bayad sa seminar na ginawa ko kasama ang aking mga kamanggagawa o kapwa guro at janitor, masaya pa rin ako at nakatulong ako sa kanila. Kaya po pinagpasayahan ko sa susunod, hindi na ako sa kantin mag-break para naman walang istorbo sa aking pagkain. Maraming salamat po muli sa pagtanggap sa aking liham, lubos na gumagalang, Joan. Questioning is an integral part of teaching and learning. The teacher's questioning technique would depend on a number of interactions that occur during and immediately after a question is asked. In order to improve one's questioning technique, one needs to consider certain things, like providing enough time for your students to think of an answer to your question. Wait time refers to the pause needed by the teacher after asking a question. When allotting time for an answer, one must consider a number of things like, number 1, the level of difficulty of the question. Number 2, the type of response required. Number 3, background knowledge the respondents possess. And number 4, intellectual ability of the respondent. Providing sufficient wait time may help the teacher achieve the following. Number 1, motivates thinking students to respond. Number 2, improve the quality of the responses from the students. Number 3, decreases the amount of guessing or wrong inferences. Number 4, encourages the student to ask their own questions. Number 5, increases the number of correct responses. And 6, leads the teacher to vary her questions. And number 7, provides time for the teachers to evaluate the answers given. Background in order to improve one's questioning technique is knowing one's own style of questioning. One may ask a colleague, critique your own style as to the amount of time provided and the type of answers required. Knowing your errors in questioning would make it easy to effect the necessary change. Training in divergent, high-level, and open-ended questions improves one's questioning technique. Fully aware of the instructional objectives that set for a particular lesson, a teacher would be able to frame more interesting and thought-provoking questions rather than memory type. Teachers are encouraged to provide immediate cues in order to save an unanswered question or an incomplete answer. It could be done by acknowledging the correct portion of the question and calling attention to the wrong portion, supplying hints or tips, immediately asking another question to clarify the former, and redirecting or refocusing. It is also important to consider the individual abilities and interests of the students. Experiencing success is giving correct answers, promote a fulfilling confidence in them.
Nature are curious. They ask questions about almost anything they see and hear around them. They ask casual, intelligent, and even funny questions. The teacher's reaction to their inquisitiveness can motivate or discourage them from asking questions. To encourage children to ask questions, teacher must show good examples by using the right techniques in asking questions themselves. Attending to students' question. Avoid dismissing irrelevant questions and assist them in clarifying and focusing in order to solicit correct responses. Praise the correctly formulated questions. It develops confidence in them and makes knowledge and search easy and satisfying. Allot an appropriate time slot for open questioning. This will encourage the slow thinkers to participate freely.
Tigil na! Masamang espiritu! Lumabas ka sa katawang lupa ng babaeng dito!
Ha? Kasi may espiritu agad, di pwede masakit na yung ulo? Makalis na nga.
Muli na naman po natin natunghayan ang buhay ng isa sa ating letter sender. Tunay nga po na hindi madali ang pagiging guro, hindi madali ang pagtuturo. Minsan binabagabag ka ng iyong konsensya, minsan nalilipasan ka pa ng gutom, minsan hindi ka binabayaran sa mga pinapagawa sa iyo. Pero ang mahalaga ay mahal mo ang iyong trabaho. Dahil ganito ang propesyon, ang bukasyon ng pagiging tunay na guro. Muli, sana nawa sa susunod ay makasama namin uli kayo sa pagtatanghal ng ating programa Maalaala o Kaya.
Maaari kang manalo ng 300 pesos cellphone load or 10,000 pesos cash sa MMK Text Mo Title Mo promo. Ano ang pamagat ng episode ngayong gabi?